I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm Courtney Barrett. I'm the Director of Engagement and External Relations for CCAPS, and have been working with Peter to grow and kind of relaunch our alumni network, and also working with Megan to engage students as well. So trying to continue to build that relationship. The other part of my job is also fundraising. So I help raise money for student scholarship support. So Peter and Mitch, I'll hand it off to you two, and I will operate and make sure that we keep recording so we don't lose anything.
All right, well, I think everybody knows me. I'm Peter Hilger, of course, faculty director of the Construction and Facility Management program. But what I wanted to just sort of append to what Courtney said is, number one, she won't be asking you for money, even though she raises money for scholarship funds, okay? So that's not part of this. Just want you to know that you still have your beer money. But number two, this is just another way that we've, in this new environment, have tested out ways that we can connect our alumni with our students in a more intimate environment. We haven't always been that successful in the past, so we're reinventing something and hoping to connect current students with former students and what they do, and just, you know, make it really informal, just sort of talk about it. So Mitch, what do you have to say for yourself today?
Hi, I'm Mitch Johnson. I'm a senior in the construction management program here at the University of Minnesota. I'm in the commercial track, and this year I am the president of CFMSA. It's a student association group that, you know, we kind of meet outside of the classroom. There's a lot of stuff to learn inside the classroom for sure, and there's, you know, network building and real world experience talks that we can have outside. Last week, we had the opportunity to visit the expo, and Sam, one of the people here, was able to attend that tour. But that's just one of the examples of ways that we can kind of get students out into the real world and see what we're all majoring in. So. You're mute, Peter. Just heads up.
I know. That's the new thing. It's a new phrase. You're either going to lose your mask on a sidewalk or you're going to have to unmute, one of the others. That's the two things that'll happen, that are sure to happen these days. So why don't we go ahead and have you launch. Tell us about what you do and what you have done.
Sure. My name is Christian Davern. I'm an alumni, as you can probably guess. I graduated from the program in 2007. So kind of shortly after it started. I graduated the construction management program because at that point there was not a facilities management program. But I do work in facilities management, although I have worked with NAC Mechanical, a mechanical contractor, so I've been on the construction side as well. I'm also a past president of the National Association of Women in Construction in the Twin Cities. So for that scholarship value, if you don't get one from construction management here, NAWIC also provides them. So any students on the call, if you're looking for money still, hit us up. Right now I work for the University of Minnesota. I manage Eastcliff, which is the home of the president of the University of Minnesota. So I am the facilities supervisor at Eastcliff. That's a picture of the property right there. I was actually there this morning. So facilities management is one of the essential groups on campus. So I've been working through the whole shutdown. So even after the students went home last year, my department didn't go anywhere. So we still had to keep the buildings running. We still had to clean everything. And we are still doing that today. So lots of changes for our group just to maintain campus with the COVID times. So but today I'm not actually going to talk about my current job. I'm going to talk about the job I was doing when I graduated from the construction management program. So at that point in time, I was the facilities manager for the libraries on the East Bank campus. So all of the libraries on the East Bank. So I managed the facilities for Walter Library, the Math Library, the Architecture and Landscape Architecture Library, and also parts of the Biomedical Library. So I'm going to talk about the Smart Learning Commons. And the main reason I have the slide deck is to keep me on topic, because otherwise I will go off on tangents. So if you would like me to go off on a tangent, please ask me a question and I will continue to go. So if you want to move to the next one here. And so I thought I'd talk about Smart Learning Commons because it's a place you can go visit, unlike East Cliff where you need an invitation. So in the past, before COVID times, the East Cliff would invite everybody graduating, all the seniors graduating there, so you could come see it, but I don't know how that's going to work. So I figured we'd talk about the Smart Commons. This is the picture of the second floor of Walter Library walking into the Smart Commons. And I'm just going to note that the clock at the top there took me 4 years to fix to make that work again. During construction, when Walter Library was under construction, they took the clock hands down and didn't bring them back. And I had to get those specialty cast from the art school and a bunch of other stuff. So all sorts of weird things with historic buildings that we'll get into more. But I always like pictures of that clock because it took me 5 years to fix that clock. Weird things in facilities. Okay, so before room 204 in Walter Library was called the Digital Media Center. Had big cubicles, so you can kind of see them in the back here. So this was back, I know students now you might remember back in your early elementary school days, you'd go to the media lab at your elementary school maybe, where you would, you'd get to look at a computer. And so that's what this lab was. There wasn't peer tutoring, there were no open shelves. In fact, there was a back room that had all the shelves in those stacks that move, the bookshelves that move, so nobody could go in them. You had to talk to a librarian to go get even a DVD. So one of the big challenges we had, the Walter Library was redone in 1999, but the as-built drawings, even that close, were not accurate. They showed electrical runs that weren't there, HVAC systems that didn't exist, runs and stuff like that. So we're trying to remodel the space based on drawings that aren't right. And so there continued to be a back and forth between myself and the architects and engineers. So they'd say, well, we're just going to put this here because there's an electrical line there. And I go, it's not there. They'd say, well, the plans say it's there. It's on the as-built. That's nice. Let's go walk up there. I can tell you it's not there. So that was a big challenge. Walter Library, and especially the second floor reading rooms, are on the Registry of Historic Places. That meant that we could not make a permanent change to the rooms. Everything you do in a historic property has to be reversible. So I can't punch a new hole in the wall somewhere. I have to make that reversible. And that's actually the case at East Cliff where I am now as well. East Cliff is also on the Registry of Historic Places. So I can't just put an addition on the back. It's not a thing. So stuff like that becomes a challenge. Again, that closed stack collection had to move, but it still needed to be available for checkout. So we had to move it somewhere. We were going to move it so it was open stack so you could walk around and look at the DVDs and things now. But in the meantime, what do we do with this? Because we don't just have extra space sitting around in the library to put up a bunch of shelves. So where do we put that collection during construction? And then construction needed to be done during the summer so that the Smart Commons could open for the fall. So during it, we had those closed shelves were distributed and stored elsewhere. So a bunch of it actually moved to other collections that they fit with. So that at one point they had all the DVDs here because we had DVD players at Walter Library, and not everybody had a DVD player at home, and there was no streaming. So now people had DVD players at home when this happened, so we could take the Asian languages collection as an example and send it to the Asian languages library where there were librarians who could read the kanji on the collections as an example. And then some of them, we actually temporarily installed shelving in the room across the way in 208 and took some of the furniture out of there. Then all the furniture had to be removed, broken down, repaired, or sent to reuse. So if you've ever been down in the basement of Walter Library, around the corner from the Wise Owl Cafe is a whole bunch of benches along the wall. Those didn't used to be there. They used to be in room 204. So we took them apart, put them down there. Now students can use them elsewhere. And then there was a big, heavy marble desk that had to be cut apart and reinstalled at a new location. So get to the next one. So this is, now I know the Smart has changed since, or the room 204 has changed since this project, but this is what the project did at the end. So I just kind of wanted to show you guys what it looked like. On the left, you'll see a classroom that is still present, but you'll see there were many rows of books or shelves in the middle. And that was done strategically to kind of try to create a barrier. So if there's a classroom going on, some of the sound would get absorbed by those shelves before you hit a different area of study. Similarly, you'll see a bank of computers and computer stations. Again, we were still servicing some of that need that existed in 2010. Not everybody had a laptop. So historic property challenges. One big thing is the floor at Walter Library is made of Tennessee pink marble. That is no longer in the ground. Like, it's quarried out. You cannot get it. It does not exist in the ground anymore. So we cannot replace the floor tile. So that meant any material that had to come in for this project or be done could not damage the floor in the Great Hall, cannot damage anything. So it became a very big challenge. Pretty easy to deal with in construction. You can just put runners down and things like that. But there's a big, usually people are like, well, who cares if I just scrape the floor? I'll just retile it or I'll put something down. That is not how it's going to work at Walter. The other thing is, like I said, we could not do permanent alterations of the space. So we put in this, what's called a DIRT system. That's just a name brand, but it's basically a cubicle system. And so what we did was we did the cubicle system and we set it next to the walls, but they're not actually attached to the walls. They're attached to the raised floor. And that's why there's these random jut outs that happen and why we have that heavy crown molding on the top. And that's to provide stability and rigidity as we remodeled that space. Because, you know, like I said, we could not attach it to the wall. So we had to figure out how to support it only from the floor. In addition to that, none of the rooms in there have tops. And the reason for that is we cannot make alterations to the ceiling or the walls in that room. So I cannot bring fire protection or HVAC down to those rooms. The only way to keep those rooms having fire protection and the appropriate heating and cooling is to leave the ceilings off. So I know when these first opened, we got a lot of complaints because you could hear people because the sound would go out. And there's not a lot, you know, while maintaining historic with, you know, we can separate it, but we can't cap it. So like I said, the raised floor is something that was done in 1999. So this is actually not my project. This is a project that has happened since I was at Walter, but this is a picture of Walter's raised floor with the flooring gone. So there's a raised floor when you walk into the reading rooms, you go up a little ramp. And what that does is it lets all the electrical and all that work go underneath. And so actually to get into these dirt walls, we had to do new electrical runs that then went up into the walls to get electrical where we needed it. But then, like I said, and then one of the big challenge I had was, again, we had all these computers and all these technology that they still wanted to keep in the space at the time. And so I was asking librarians and project people and programmatic people, how many outlets do you need? Where do you want laptops? Where do you want permanent computer stations? Where do you want this? And they're like, the project's not opening for 6 months. Why do you need to know? Like, I need to do a run under the floor, and I need to tear up the floor to do that. And I need to know how many of those you want, where you want them, so I can make those runs happen. Because I'm going to have to take up the carpet, take up the floor, then rerun it, and then put it all back down. So, other challenges, buying furniture for public spaces. The University of Minnesota libraries, I did a count, and each bathroom at Walter during like finals week will get several thousand people walking through it a day, because that's how many people walk in and out of Walter. So we had constant cleaning even before COVID. Now it's got to be insane. And then at the other hand, each one of those chairs gets used for most of the day. And so every soft piece of seating the way that you do maintenance on seating is it's on number of rubs. So how often can somebody rub that chair? And a chair in your house will have, a couple hundred, rub count is what it's how many rubs in such amount of time. And a chair in your house have a couple hundred. A chair at a place like Walter has to have several thousand. And so every once in a while you look at things like this and they go, why does a chair cost $500 or $700? Because it has to stand up to constant use. So, you run into a lot of stuff like that. And then the other thing we did, again, for historic reasons, we can change the carpet, but we can't change, we couldn't put up walls or things. So we would separate areas of the Smart Commons. If you look down, certain areas have different carpets than other areas, just as a way to try to separate them. And then we had a couple of non-historic areas kind of outside of the walls of just that room. So we got to put in offices that were needed and things just kind of tucked away where it's not historic. After move-in, how are people using the space? What else do we need? That's when a lot of those movable whiteboards got purchased and more rolling chairs and things like that. Because you know, you design a space and then people start using it and you go, oh wait, we need that and this and the other thing. And then as a fun fact, because I always like these, there are 200 carved owls in Walter Library. Only one has pupils. So if you want to know where that is, you can ask me. But there's owls carved all over the place. I also helped with build the Wise Owl Cafe, and that's why it's called the Wise Owl, because there are, I think it's 226 owls carved all over Walter. I see in chat, how do they separate a facility into historic and non-historic? So that gets done primarily through, trying to remember what it calls. It's there's an office on campus and at the state called Historic Preservation Office. On campus, we shorten it to SHPO, so State Historic Preservation Office, I think is what it is. But basically, when a building, you want to make a building historic, you submit the building and plans and pictures to the Historic Preservation Society, which is either statewide or nationally, and then it gets listed on the Register of Historic Places. Most places, only the outside of the building gets designated historic, but other places you want other areas to be designated historic. So for Walter Library, that's the reading rooms on the second floor, the big grand staircases, and the first floor entry. So those areas are considered historic. They are of historic significance. The big reason why they were designated that way for Walter specifically is Walter Library was designed by Clarence H. Johnston, and he designed the state capitol as well as most of the outside of the buildings along Northrop Mall. But the inside of Walter, these areas were an area he actually helped design. And so that kind of kicked it to that level. And also Walter Library was specifically designed to be a cathedral of learning. So that's why when you walk into the second floor, it kind of feels church-like because it's so tall and so curved, and there's glass and there's carvings and there's those kinds of things. And so that helps designate that historic. It also just from its use over time and people's connection to it. Almost everyone who studies at the University of Minnesota has a Walter story. So kind of like Northrop Auditorium in that way. A lot of people graduate at Northrop Auditorium or have convocation at Northrop Auditorium or have some other connection to Northrop. So from my Women in Construction group, we got to do some tours of Northrop when it was under its remodel construction. And they did things like save columns, even though those columns are no longer in the main auditorium, the columns are still into someone's office, you know, and things like that so that they get saved historic. So you could, in theory, restore it back.
Got another question here.
Okay.
Did you have any specific training in working with historic buildings, or did you have to learn as you went?
I learned as I went. I did not have any specific training on historic buildings. I got hired to work at Walter Library and then learned historic stuff on the fly. The library has paid for me to have training with the Minnesota Historical Society as well. So that helped a lot. And then, you know, you pick up a lot of stuff as you talk to those, the experts in it. You learn what's historic, what's not. I haven't had to go through a process to designate a building historic, so I don't know everything involved in that process, but it is interesting. It makes what was I saying? It makes maintaining a building interesting and hard, because you know, in a normal building you go, oh, well, I'll just put a, you know, we need a new office, so we'll rework this office and we'll build a wall here and we'll put a door there and it'll work out. In a historic building, you go, well, we can't do that, but could we do something else, or could we put this in a different spot? There also becomes a lot of, every once in a while you get somebody who doesn't understand that it's a historic. So I had a lot of fights with, for instance, our OIT Wi-Fi department, because they kept wanting to put holes in walls to put up Wi-Fi routers. And I kept running up and screaming at IT technicians saying, stop it. So.
Well, and Daniel asked, just as a follow-up, did you work with guidance from the state through that whole project, or were you really on your own when
I was working, so the University of Minnesota, we have enough historic buildings where we have our own office. So I was working closely with people from our own historic preservation office. So they work closely with the state. The state, as the actual ultimate gets to decide group. But like I said, the university has a really good relationship with them. And I still work with that group at East Cliff. You know, they kind of are involved in all the historic properties. And some properties that you don't think are historic actually are. So an example of one is I do maintenance on the St. Paul campus. I was a preventive maintenance planner prior to my job at East Cliff over there. But the dairy barn on the St. Paul campus is historic. So, you know, it's still used as a dairy barn, and they want to put in some robotic dairy stuff so that they can do research on things like that. And that is going through the SHPO process and is a challenge because it's a historic dairy barn.
Wow. Learn new things every day, right?
Yep. So I don't know why that one's historic. I don't know the answer to that one, but
I'm sure it has
for example, there's a lot of those.
I'm sure it's really interesting.
Yeah, like I said, so that's why the university has our own office of it, because not only everything on Northrop Mall and the Knoll, but Coffee Hall's historic on St. Paul. I said the dairy barn, you know, like we have a lot of it. It makes sense for the university to have our own.
Well, in the SHPO office too, they're just trying to milk it for all it's worth.
Oh. That's a dad joke right there, Peter.
Yeah.
So Peter, this one's for you from Adam. He wants to know, how does this project compare with the Minnesota State Capitol Restoration Project?
Well, just a sort of a minor correction, Krista. Cass Gilbert was the architect for the state capitol.
Oh, sorry, I was wrong.
I know.
I know he did some of the stuff over there, but maybe not everything. Maybe he did a side building or something.
Oh, actually, he ended up being the architect for the University of Minnesota.
Oh.
And there was a little bit of a competition between the two of them.
Gotcha.
Because they were both kind of in the same period. So it's kind of interesting. But, you know, the restoration in a lot of ways between the Walter Library and the state capitol is kind of similar, except that the state capitol had so much more stuff done to it over the years that was not even close to being historic, that it was basically a complete do-over project. And not to mention that everything in the state capitol had to be replaced. Wiring, you know, air conditioning. They even lowered the foundations so that they could create a lower level on it. So it was completely different than this. Walter was more of a restore it to the kind of the condition, it's kind of previous grandeur, but it really wasn't that far away from it.
No,
they still have the main reading rooms and stuff intact. So.
Yeah, so the project I'm talking about isn't the full restoration that happened in 1999 to 2003, I want to say, at Walter, 2002, something like that. And the restoration for that, like Peter said, the reading rooms and stuff were mainly cleaned. The big thing that was changed is all the gold work you see on the ceilings was originally put in copper and bronze at East Cliff as a budget cutting measure in the 20s. And so it was originally spec'd gold, so they brought it back to gold. And then the other thing that the whole restoration project did is the whole area, basically once you leave what's historic and kind of walk into office-y space, that was the stack core, which is what the libraries call their shelf core. So there was a whole bunch of actually short stories. So they were only about 5.5 feet tall of books that were from a basement level all the way to the whole height of Walter Library. And that stack core was built with 1920s fire protections in line. So there was no fire systems. There was no air conditioning at East Cliff prior to this. There's no suppression system. And actually what they put in was they put in an air buffer around the stack core. So if something caught fire, that in theory, the air would get in and blow the fire out. And in fact, that's an accelerant. So,
And Christian, I think you mean Walter, you said East Cliff.
Oh yeah, sorry. So that's what Walter was that as. So it was, yeah, so all of that center core was removed and now there's offices there. And but as Peter said, the historic areas of Walter were mostly intact still. They just needed to be cleaned and restored. And the cleaning process was eye-opening for people who'd worked there because smoking used to be in the building. And so the columns, for instance, have this beautiful marble white, pattern in them. And they were basically black columns before from the smoke. So.
And it's important to note too that SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, does have sort of different grades of restoration standards that they can meet. So you can, like, for example, do the exterior only and still use the interior, for a different purpose. Like if the building was not originally, was originally used for one purpose, but you're using it for a different purpose, they do allow a certain amount of latitude in that. They just basically want to say. But it's also important to note that SHPO doesn't always agree with each other. They have to wrestle with these questions while you're sitting there waiting, twiddling your thumbs. That happens quite frequently, and even all the way up to historic, designation. Mm-hmm. But typically, what's done, the process. I don't want to take too much time on this, but the process is that you get whoever one is looking at this gets basically a preservation report completed. It's a condition assessment of the building for its kind of historic capabilities. I forget the exact name of that type of report, but that needs to be prepared. And usually you hire a historian to do that, somebody that's very qualified in evaluating structures for their historic interest, what was their place in history, that sort of a thing. And then that will help guide you as to whether or not you want to continue to pursue that or abandon it. I'm working on a historic relocation project right now. And so those are some of the questions that we were going through with them, is just, how is this facility going to be used? Well, it's not going to be used the way it was originally designed. So they have to think about other ways that they can preserve call it the visual capital of the building, what people really are attracted to, but still maintain or adapt to a new use. So that becomes the standard. So even a building that wasn't air conditioned back in the day, you can't occupy it today without it, let's say, or heating. So you have to be allowed to do that. Those are the kinds of sort of things that SHPO will work with you on to sort of determine what's appropriate and what's not. So
yeah, like a fun thing I like to tell people to do is, if you go to the second floor of Walter Library, or even the first floor of the main entrance, look up and try to find a sprinkler head, because they did allow us to sprinkle, but they hid them in the rosettes. Mm-hmm. So if you look up all this, and if you look up in the Smart Commons, the room I'm talking about in 204 and in 208 across the hall, the ceiling up there is painted to look like wood. So they painted the sprinkling system the same. So again, if you go up and you look up, it's really hard to find, but the sprinkler heads are in rosettes so that they got hidden.
Yeah. So Krishna, thank you very much for that. That's And I'm going to bet, I don't know, I did not know about this, one-eyed owl.
Yeah,
But
there's
I have to believe it's in the main reading room, because after all, if it's got only one eye with it and it's with pupils, it would be where the students are, right?
It is. There's one in the main, it's in the main reading room. And it is student vandalism from way back in the day.
Well, that wasn't very wise. Okay.
No. So, and then if you want to do the next slide here, Courtney, before we hand it over.
Perfect. And I did just have 2 more quick questions.
Okay.
Who did the restoration work? I'm sure that's a whole process that the university has to go through.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to historic preservation, are there exceptions for major safety issues, like the example of the core stacks? And I think you touched on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, and there are exceptions. Like Peter said, you have to work with the SHPO office to figure out how to work those exceptions in.
Mhm.
And then the who did the restoration, it really depends on which particular piece of the building you're talking about. There's different people who, in order to restore the marble desks on the 2nd floor, they got in mason cutters from Italy came over to fix it. The plaster work on the ceiling's a different company. There are specialists in these kind of restorations, so it depends on what you're talking about. Each thing is different. So, and then this is one of my favorite pictures that I found while I worked at Walter. It's available now at the University Archives, but the man in the front is President Kaufman. The guy holding a box is Frank K. Walter. He was the university librarian and who Walter Library is named after. And they are laying the cornerstone for Walter. And you can see there are at least 3 masons standing around going, will you guys stop talking so I can keep building the stupid building? And this would be in 1920. So 100 years ago, it's still a problem today. So,
Nowadays, they would just be on their phone, right? Waiting.
they'd all be standing there, somebody's got to talk about it.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
sure
thank
they're waiting on
you.
the architect.
Yeah.
Yep.
So with that, turn it over to Kurt Klusnick. Kurt's with Lifetime Fitness. So he's a very fit fellow.
But I'm a work in progress. I used to be many, many years ago. Well, thank you for the introduction, Peter. So I'll give you a little background about Lifetime and really our core business before we jump into one of the projects I wanted to talk about. And this is really more of an organic and informal, I like to talk. So what I'm saying is feel free to interrupt me. So I think everybody knows Lifetime. It was formerly Lifetime Fitness. We rebranded as just Lifetime. So the core business would be, the health and fitness clubs that you see around the Minneapolis, St. Paul area. It's really where we got our start. And now we have over 150 facilities throughout the nation and Canada for that matter. And we have around 10 million square feet of space that we've built and we manage. So, we've got the traditional suite of services like your cardio, your free weights, your aquatics, things like that. And then recently we've gotten into, the yoga, the bar, the Pilates. We've got a golf simulator in Edina, and I think we'll be rolling that out, if we haven't already in other clubs. It seems to be fairly popular. And just because we don't have enough going on in the clubs already, we've got a salon where you can get your hair and nails done, which you can see I spend a lot of money on haircuts and manage. And then also got a variety of dining options that, were from like a grab and go, almost like a, healthy convenience store setup to, something that would, run the gamut to traditional sit down location with a bar and with a full bar and staff that would wait on you, wait staff. So in addition to our business, what we've done recently is we've rolled out a couple other ventures. So there's a Lifetime Work, which is a co-working space. And the first one was in St. Louis Park. We got one in Edina. They're throughout the country now. Basically, it's just a co-working office style facility that's set up and geared towards those that want to have a healthy life-work balance. So in addition to that, too, we've got the new Lifetime Living that we've rolled out. And we've got 2 projects that we recently finished with Lifetime Living. So it's traditional multi-family projects. It's geared towards the higher end of the rental market. And so, it's got anything from top pools and all the amenities that you would see in one of our clubs or a spa. And typically we site one of these near where we have, lifetime work, or we've got a club, so that we can leverage those other services. So I think probably everyone saw what's maybe 6 months or a year ago now, Twin City Business and St. Paul Paper, Apples Paper kicked out that, launch a high-rise attached to Southdale, the mall in Southdale. And the project put on hold due to COVID, but, we still would hope that, once we're on the other side of COVID, that would come back around. So those are the kind of projects that we run through. And, my role as a senior estimator in the firm, it's half project manager, half estimator. It's half. It's roles depend, I guess, daily on what we're on. But so I guess one of the things that I wasn't aware of, and when I joined Lifetime, is the fact that we've got real estate development group. We've got our own architecture group in-house. We have a certain number of engineers that are employed in-house as well. And then we've got Lifetime Construction. And Lifetime Construction can't be that big, but you'd think, the A&Ps, the KAs, the Mortensons, like Mortenson was the general contractor, did the original Walter Library remodel in 99 to 2003, around there. You'd think, oh, well, we can't, Lifetime Construction, they must do, 4 or 5 projects a year. And I was pleasantly surprised to learn, this is prior to COVID, we pretty consistently did around $500 million a year in builds, in new builds that can range anywhere from a retrofit inside an existing club, an active open remodel project on targeted areas, or it could be a new ground up facility that we have, it's a greenfield site or brownfield site where we're building a new building. So I thought that was interesting. So there's a lot of opportunity, and at Lifetime, if you're in architecture, engineering, or construction. So, and I think that most of the folks on the call here are. So I was asked to give a brief overview of how COVID impacted our operation. And I think everyone has seen in the newspaper, there's been layoffs at firms, folks being furloughed, projects stopped, things like that. No one escaped that, even at Lifetime. But, happy to say that, the projects that were, paused per se, are being, projects are being restarted. And that has posed some challenges. And so one of the projects I want to talk about today, and I would love to put slides like my cohort did here and go through a PowerPoint presentation. Unfortunately, a lot of the things that I have or could present, they still need to go through planning and zone, and working for a large corporation. I hope everyone appreciates this. So a lot of the sign up before I can push out complete designs or renderings of projects. So I will send, when we have the grand opening, everyone a packet of the PowerPoint slides that I had teed up here, and you can review them in your leisure after the fact. But so I want to go through one of the projects that we had in the southern portion of the United States. It still is an active project, and just talk about some of the challenges that we had. So once COVID hit, and we're still going through it for that matter, we are going to power through it as an organization, and we are fairly bearish on what the outcome is going to be post-COVID. So, we're not stopping, we're not anywhere, we're continuing to build much more selective about what we do. And one of the projects, this project in the Southwest is one that appears to be targeted for a restart. So back in March, like with a lot of firms, construction came to almost a grinding halt, and projects were put on pause, and everyone was sent home because we weren't sure how to handle the, COVID and how contagious it was or how it was spread and things like that. And rightly so, because, we want to make sure we take care of our people that work for us, and our trade partners are our most important set, along with our, of course, clients and clients. So we put the project on pause. The project was basically through the earthwork and the footing and function portion of the schedule. So what has happened now that we want to restart it? Well, the decision has been made to redesign the project, and I'll give you an example of what it looked like before. So this was about 140,000 four-story club facility before, and we had a 4-level parking ramp with a tennis facility of the project right behind the building. So with the reset or the resnap, the decision was made to eliminate the tennis barn on top of the parking garage. So eliminating a floor, basically the 4th floor on a parking garage. So you have a parking garage, if you can visualize this, and I apologize for not being able to share a picture, but you've got 3 stories of parking, almost 4 stories of parking, and then on that 4th floor deck, you have where the tennis facility would have been, walls and a roof and all the mechanical systems and plumbing and restrooms and things like that would normally be associated with a facility like that. So that was being removed, and that was static. In addition, one of the floors on the being removed. So we went through and removed one of the floors on the club. Becomes problematic when you have a building that's under construction. You've got your footings and foundations in, everything is backfilled. You might have some underground utilities in place, in fact, and you're ready to start work really on the 1st floor and swinging steel to eliminate a floor. So I guess let's just talk through some of the logistical challenges or some of the design challenges that we had to go through as a team to make sure that this would happen. Well, of course, because the footings and foundations were in, we had also a very have a very good project team on it. And of course, they bought all the structural steel and all this on the project. So that was already ready and set to go to the project and was laid down in our steel fabricator's yard. So what we had to do is try to repurpose so much of the existing steel frame that we had already fabricated so that we could eliminate a 4th floor on the club building, basically drop the roof down and use the former 4th floor deck as the roof deck now, out like we had before. But in concert with, the change of removing a floor, reducing the size of the structure, the other challenges is that we had precast concrete shear walls. So the shear wall, basically, if you think about it, typically they're around stair shafts and elevator shafts and things like that, so that they help absorb forces in the building, act like the spokes on a wheel. I don't know, bike wheel, right? Everybody's familiar with that. So we had shear walls that basically stuck up through the roof system because we had lowered the roof down to the 4th floor deck level. Had, another 16 feet of shear wall that would pop up through what would be our new roof now, right? So what do we do with that? And the precaster had cast most of the panels. So we had to make a determination from a cost standpoint, from a schedule standpoint, when does it make sense to actually modify a precast shear wall panel, and when does it make sense to just, fabricate a new one? So that was an exercise that we had to go through as well. And, we did that, and we made the decision basically to cut certain panels where it made sense. We weren't incurring, a lot of labor, and in other instances where we had, and again, understand that a lot of these shear walls were now overbuilt because we had a building originally with 4 floors and now we have 3 floors. um, we, we had more than our factor of safety required by code or by engineering and architecture practice. When we needed to simplify it, the fault was to, if we couldn't easily modify it, then we would have to basically provide new. So in a number of instances, we actually cast new panels for the shear walls. And you think through this, well, how do you're gonna maybe from the top down. I'm not a designer, so I defer to the designers in the team here to tell me how they actually do that. But we're going to build it from the bottom up. And thinking through this, okay, well, we've lost a floor, so now we've got basically a mechanical system that might be have more capacity than what we need, or maybe there's more mechanical equipment up on the roof or elsewhere than what we need to heat and cool the building. So can we reduce that? Have we purchased the units already? And we went through, an exercise and found out how to right size the mechanical system for the changes. Really, one of the things that we had to go through is actually determine, what changes would we make to the exterior facade. And again, my role, basically budget, schedule, and communication. There are internal consultants or external consultants. We'll meet with our internal clients depending on who the decision stakeholders are, and determine what the architectural fabric building wants to be on the outside. So unfortunately, we had taken planning and zoning, and we had a building permit pulled and everything like that. So we had checked the boxes off like we normally would on a project. But because we've made such large changes to the structure, both on the parking ramp and also on the club building itself, I guess my belief that we would have to bring it back through the city, not only for perhaps some type of review with planning or the earth having jurisdiction there, or the building official would certainly want to see the changes. So that's another challenge that we have to deal with too on the project due to the reset and COVID. So I guess there's some takeaways on this, and I know we're running up towards the 5 o'clock hard stop here, and we need 5 minutes for questions, so I'll wrap it up. But we had to early on determine, does it make sense from a building and design standpoint to pull out floors, and is it going to be advantageous for us on the cost side of things to do all this work, because we are going to money on construction materials per se and some construction labor if we remove a floor, but we're going to incur more money for design fees and other professional services, and perhaps if we have to take it back through the city approvals or whatever approvals we have to go through, we are going to have some more soft costs on the project as well. So where is that break-even point, and when does it really make sense to do this? And we did do that in leadership of the firm, made the decision based on some of the input that we gave them. That's really it in a nutshell. I do have a smoking hot deal on some structural steel. If you need some wide flange beams or some tubes, I'd be happy to put you in touch with a vendor if you'd like to get a really good deal on some iron. So are there any questions or anything else that I can or points that I didn't hit?
I was just going to come up here just to sort of point out that having to go back and get city approvals is not necessarily so logical when you're removing a floor. You might think, well, they can't have any problems with that because we're actually reducing the density or the mass.
Sure.
Everybody ought to be happy with that. But there are some cities that would say, no, we want the density, we want the mass. We wanted what you had planned to put there. And so as soon as you come in and change, they feel like it's open for renegotiation. So you leave yourself vulnerable that way. And the second point I was going to make, Kurt, on the decision, kind of we're spending more money to actually build less than what we had originally planned before, really comes down to what Christia does, and that is it's the long-term costs of owning and managing the facility, not the short-term front-end costs.
Yep.
So even though we may be paying slightly more for building less right now, in the long run, we might be saving a lot more money on maintenance cost, operating costs, stuff like that. At least until management comes back to you and says, hey, remember that floor we took off? Hey, can we add that back now?
Well, that's a great conversation, because we did actually have that discussion point with leadership. And on the club building, if you remove this fourth floor, there's a no-go point where we can't undo what we did. However, on the ramp, there is some more flexibility, because basically we're just lopping off the top of the cake, and the footings and foundations are sized for that load that was going to be imposed on the structure before. We can go back in and perhaps in a future time add back in whatever it wants to be on top of the tennis barn, and add the connecting link back from the tennis barn to but unfortunately, I think that it wouldn't be cost effective to try to put a fourth floor on an open existing operating building once we're done with a grand opening. So that's a good point.
I know, just as an example, on campus, there's a couple of buildings on campus that were built with future floors in mind.
Yeah.
Recently, campus did a solar upgrade, and a lot of the solar panels for campus went on those buildings that had the structural support for that weight, but we never built more on top of it.
We did look at solar too, but it was not maybe as attractive as what the leadership thought. So they did pass on that, but that is one of the things that we looked at as well. So, and I give it a 30 shot of maybe putting a second floor 5 years, or the fourth back on the next 5 years on the ramp side anyway. But I would be very pleasantly surprised if we did it, and be happy to be involved in the project. So
We have a question here in the chat. From the estimating perspective, how do you not only account for the wasted materials, but also attempt to save money with their resale or reuse? And how do you go about reselling or reusing those extra materials?
Well, I'm half joking, saying that there's a deal on some structural steel. I certainly could hook you up with someone, but actually what we did is we sat down with a series of discussions with our architects and engineers via Zoom or WebEx, whatever you want to use. And we went through and actually looked at the shop drawings and say, we can use this, we can't use this. And it was a series of meetings that were very hands-on, where we talked as a team. And actually it was, going down to a vendor's yard, their laydown yard, whether it was the precaster or the steel fabricator, and one, either, myself or someone else actually just colored up, let's just take precast for an example, actually colored up or highlighted what was cast and what wasn't cast with respect to precast panels, based on some feedback from the vendor. And then that was given to our structural engineers. And then we had a meeting with our structural architect, and then, the people that I work with, and we determined a path forward. The precast panels, there really isn't much of a resale value on that. That's a sunk cost. The steel, I think that we may try to repurpose that on other projects. We have a good relationship with the steel fabricator. We've used them on other projects. If we can use the steel that was slated for that fourth floor on another build somewhere else, I guess we're teed up to do that. But I am accounting for a certain percentage of loss, a very high percentage of loss or waste on this, just due to the redesign. Yes, there is going to be significantly more waste, and it was not an easy task to come up with a plan forward. It took the entire team working together to come up with the plan.
Great.
I would add as well, Kurt, that just to that, add on to that question, it's not unlike having to deal with salvage value in an existing building. As an estimator, you can never accurately quantify what you might get back in salvage value, because you really can't determine what the actual reuse of something you pull out of a building would be. And correct. Oftentimes owners think, oh, it's got to be worth a lot of money, and you just can't find the market for it. But it's nice to see, Kurt, that you've got a steal of a deal there. So,
Boo, Peter. I do have probably what might be our last question, but if anybody has another question they want to pop into the chat or unmute yourself here in a minute. As an estimator or project manager, how much of your work involves travel, especially when pertaining to out-of-state projects? Or how much time do you need to bill to the project or be on site?
Well, I
Has
guess
that changed since COVID?
Yeah, I have a little bit of a unique situation. I quite frankly have been blessed because I was on the road for the majority of my career. In my current role, I don't have to travel as much as I have in the past. In fact, travel is more exception and not the rule. So if I'm on a plane, it's usually for an up and down, 1 or 2 day up and down, one day where, wheels up at 9 and back at 7 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that. Or if, a couple of days. Whereas when I was working out in the field, whether as a superintendent or as a project manager, I was typically on site 100% of the time. So I was gone, say 4 or 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days, sometimes 10 days or more at a time before I could get back home. But that was the path that I chose. There are certain other, there's many different paths in construction. And if you want to be on the road 100% time, you can do that. If you want to find a path where, you're home every night, I think you can do that too. It's just, what's important to you and what's a good fit for you.
So Kurt, isn't it true also, you talked about your departments that you have at Lifetime? Yep. I heard at one point you also have your own millwork shop, right?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. Ken, the person that runs our millwork shop, he just very displeased with me. We have probably, and my jaw dropped when I walked into the facility. We have our own millwork group. So we build our own lockers, we build anything that you can touch and feel inside one of our clubs or one of our other properties is by our Lifetime Millwork, and they do a very, very good job. Working in the industry, I didn't think when I walked through the door that things would be as automated and that we'd have robots and things like that, but we do. So I think it's probably one of the better kept secrets for millwork, or one of the better kept secrets within Lifetime. I think after COVID, if anyone would want to walk through one of the shops and see it in action, I think we could certainly do that.
Yeah, I brought that up only because we're talking about estimating, but one would ask, what could possibly be the logic for a company like Lifetime to have their own millwork shop? There's other people that do this, they can contract for it. And the rationale, I'm assuming, is that first of all, number one, millwork is a touch and feel item that is very critical to how your customers perceive the experience. And number two, it's very expensive.
It is. Well, it puts us in better control. Whether you talk, it's the same thing with if you talk McGough or an A&P or Knudsen, self-perform certain types of work. The reason why we brought millwork in-house, and is my belief, and this is just my opinion, I'm not speaking on behalf of the company, is so that we can manage budget and schedule better. Mm-hmm. And I think that quality goes without. We're going to want the same level of quality, whether we outsource it or we provide the product in-house. But it helps me manage, or helps us manage the schedule and the budget. And, we never, ever, ever have a mad dash towards the end on any construction project where we have, casework being installed at the 11th hour, a change that needs to be made, right? I mean, that'll never happen on any project anywhere. Crossing and Mortensen would never do that, I'm sure. But I'm joking. I'm being a little bit snarky here because it happens everywhere. But it allows us to better react and maintain our cutting dates as well as, millwork source. I may have production scheduled for February and my millwork may be done in April. I may not open until September. Something may be, field measured wrong, or something may have been damaged in transit. Okay, now what? So can I really have a true good grand opening if I have only half my list in place? Or if I'm missing my main reception desk? No, I can't. But because we have the millwork group in house, it gives us the ability to say, hey, we can phone a friend and say, I know you're going to have to work late. I know you're going to have to work a weekend or a second shift or a third shift, but can you please help us and make this desk drawer or refab this panel on this reception desk so that we can have a good customer experience and a really good opening? Because, the first impressions do matter. And one of the things that I was surprised about is how many people actually do show up when we open a club. I mean, they're stacked lot, and it's like a Black Friday sale at Walmart or Target. We've got thousands of people that walk through the doors, and we're very fortunate, and I'm very happy that takes place. But I know the leadership would be very. We had no lock or partial lockers or something wrong with the reception desk, so that gives us a little bit more flexibility.
Kurt, I did pop your lifetime email in the chat. I'm assuming that is okay for students to connect with you if they wanted to,
Please do.
Schedule a time or something to check something out virtually or what have you.
Yes, please do.
Great.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, Christian and Kurt, just joining us today, and all the students that came on board. Appreciate it, Mitch, for doing what you did to organize. And this will hopefully be kind of a thing of the future where we can bring some of our, I don't know, over 400 alums out there right now and tell us what they're doing, but not all in one session. Okay. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Courtney, to wrap this up.
Well, thank you, everyone. Again, I put both Krista and Kurt's emails in the chat, but feel free to reach out. I think you can see them on the calendar invite as well. So thank you, everyone. And, if you have any feedback or ideas for things that you want to hear about in the future, we did survey some of our alumni recently, and they have some great ideas and things that they would love to share with you all. So if you're interested in participating in another one, we're hoping to do another one in December in a couple weeks, but depending on the world and whatnot, we might wait until after the first of the year. So we'll connect, and Mitch, I'll reach out to you and we'll connect on that as well. So thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your week, and go Gophers.
Safe out there, and also enjoy your holiday safely.
Yes, be safe, you guys.
All righty.
Thanks, everyone. Be safe.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.